All right, so we've got European trading stations and possessions in Africa and Asia circa 1750, right? So like I said many times, when you guys have your regents, the first couple of questions are going to be something about the world in 1750 unit. So you should always look at your map key to get a sense of what, what's what, right? So when you see slanty lines like this, it's French territory. Where do I see French territory in 1750? This part of India is controlled by the French. Slanty lines going this way is British. I see some British land right here, right? British land obviously in England, slanted that way. Portuguese territory is like straight across lines, and I see that on the east coast of Africa. Spanish territory is like this dark gray. There's not much of it, but there's a little bit of it in Spain itself and in the Philippines. This is a photocopy, that's why it doesn't look so clear. You guys will get nice copies when you take your regents. And then the dark is Dutch territory, which is here and here. Just for fun, where do Dutch people live? Netherlands, very good. Not that you need to know that for the regents, but it's just fun to know. What is a valid conclusion based on the information shown on this map? So what I recommend with map questions, take every answer choice, apply them to the map, and see if you can make sense of it. So let's see. Russia had the largest number of trading stations in Asia. So I got to focus my attention on Asia, right? This is Asia. And I got to see if I see a lot of Russian stuff. I see Rus here for Russia. Do you see any other Russia ones? No, just that. So is there any place that you see more than Russia in parentheses? Who has a lot of land in Asia? Can you guys guess what BR and FR mean? Yeah, British and the French. Do the British have more territory than Russia in terms of number of dots? Yeah. Okay, so I can't say that Russia had the largest number of them, right? Because they certainly do not. I see more control by the British and the French than Russia. So we're going to cross that one off. Most European trading stations and empires were located along the coast. Well, let's see. Looks like all of them except one. This is not on the coast, but the rest of them are. So could that be a potential answer choice? Could be potential answer choice, so I'll just mark it like that. France controlled more ports in India than Britain did. All right, so let's go to India. Let's count them up. I see 1 British, 2 British, 3 British. Okay, so 3 for the British. So I'll put like a little 3 next to this one to remind me. And let's go to France. Let's see. France. It's only 2. 2 for France. So can that be our answer choice? Nope. Each European power represented had possessions in the East Indies. Okay, we'll have to find East Indies. Just got to scan around, boom. East Indies. Do we see all these places controlling land here? No. All right, I'm missing a few. Who am I missing? I got the Portuguese, I got the Dutch, right? So they're there, and the Dutch are there. Do I see any Spanish? Nope, I see no Spanish, and I see no British. So since I don't see those guys here, I can't pick that one. So yes, number 2 is going to be our answer. These are annoying because they take you a long time, but take your time. You guys have 3 hours, sometimes even more in some cases, to do this. So take your time, right? Number 2 is the answer. How do I know that? I just had to look at every answer choice, find them in the map. Which Europeans controlled the waterways connecting the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean? All right, well, I have to find both of those bodies of water. Here's the Indian Ocean, here's the Pacific Ocean, and then where the oceans meet would be like here. So what's the country that's controlling land here? The Dutch is our answer. Bada bing, right? None of these other countries are represented where the oceans meet. Cool. All right. Let's keep going. Simón Bolívar. Let's talk about Simón Bolívar. But tell me who this guy was or what he wanted to do. Unite South Americans. Yeah, his goal was basically to create a United States of South America. Never happened, but that's what he wanted. Right, so South Africa is the continent we associate with Bolivar. Who was in charge of a lot of South Africa before they got independence? If you go to South Africa today, what languages might you hear? Spanish. Anything else? Maybe, yes, a little French.
Portuguese.
And Portuguese. Those are your big two. There could be others. I'm sure some people speak English, but probably the biggest ones are Spanish and Portuguese, right? So we'll just say fought for independence from European countries. Okay, and it's like Rob says, since he was all about unification and independence and being able to rule yourself without interference, what kind of leader might I call this guy? What kind of leaders try to unite people that are similar to try to make them stronger? We'll call him a nationalist leader. Right, nationalist leaders have pride in their countries, right? People take pride in their countries or encouraged to have pride in their countries if their countries are strong, right? How do you become strong? You unite, you come together, right? Because your country is stronger if everyone's fighting on the same side. And when you're not united, that means you're ripe for the taking. Someone might exploit that division, if you will. So, I shall tell you with what we must provide ourselves in order to expel the Spaniards, right? This is what we have to do to kick the Spanish out. And to found, meaning create, a free government. It is union, obviously, just like Rob said. But such union will come about through sensible planning and well-directed actions rather than by divine magic. America stands together because it is abandoned by all other nations. It's isolated in the center of the world. It has no diplomatic relations, nor does it receive any military assistance. Instead, America is attacked by Spain, which has more military supplies than any we can possibly acquire through furtive, meaning stealthy means. So basically he's saying, right, our country is not as strong as Spain when we're divided and when we don't have modern weapons. When success is not assured, when the state is weak, and when results are distantly seen, all men hesitate. Opinion is divided, passions rage, and the enemy fans these passions in order to win an easy victory because of them. All right, so I won't read the rest of this because you guys know the general theme here, but he keeps saying we got to find ways to come together, because if we don't come together, we will never be strong and independent. Okay, so just like any other nationalist leader, let's make some comparisons. Who's another nationalist leader that you've learned about this year who said we have to unite to be stronger? Maybe a German guy? Hitler would be one of them, a nationalist leader. German people all have to live under German authority, German rule to be stronger. Who's another German guy? The blood and iron guy. Remember him? How about Otto von Bismarck? Remember that guy? It's been a while, right? German nationalist leader. Let's see, who could be an Italian nationalist leader? It's been a long time since we mentioned this guy, Benito Mussolini. How about a Vietnamese nationalist leader who wanted to unite North Vietnam and South Vietnam and have one strong country? That's Turkey. Let's do that one. Okay, Ataturk. Ataturk, nationalist leader of Turkey. For Vietnam, it's Ho Chi Minh. Probably haven't heard that name in quite a while. Okay, so let's take a look. Bolivar's actions were most likely influenced by who? How do you know? How do you know it's Enlightenment thinkers? Okay, yeah, so church officials would not encourage Simón Bolívar to have any kind of rebellion. Okay, that doesn't really make any sense for sure. Laissez-faire economists, yeah, it doesn't really have much to do with this either. Laissez-faire is another way to express what idea? Free market and capitalism, right? So that's an economic idea, not an idea about revolution and unification. If I see Marxism, it's communism, right? Doesn't really have much to do with this situation here, but Enlightenment thinkers does, right? Who's the Enlightenment thinker that said you should have a rebellion if you feel like someone is taking away your rights? Who's the guy? It's a J guy. Who's the most important Enlightenment guy? John Locke, right? John Locke would be a person who would say, oh, you don't feel like your rights are being granted? You feel like you're being repressed? You have the right to then overthrow that government, right? So John Locke would inspire the French Revolution, the American Revolution, Latin American revolutions. Very good. Okay, these are easy. All right, we've got the middle of the 1800s here, death's dispensary. A dispensary is like where you go to like get something. So where do I go to get death? I get it from this. Open to the poor, free of charge by permission of the parish, like the church. Fun. Good times. 1866. In cities and towns, drinking water was drawn from the same rivers into which raw sewage flowed. This sewage contaminated the water and the bacteria that caused cholera and typhoid fever. However, a direct link between germs and diseases had yet to be made. In England, London's Thames River was so polluted that in the summer of 1858, the Great Stink drove members of Parliament out of the House of Commons, situated close to the river. So you have to think the key terms, right? We've got cholera, we've got the 1800s, we've got Parliament. I happen to know where this river is, so that helps me, but you could still answer this without that because you also have this. So this should be easy. The illustration and excerpt depicts events from which time and place? England. Why? What's Victorian England? Victorian England just means the time period in English history when Queen Victoria was in charge. Right? The time period in history where Meiji was in charge of Japan. The time period in France when there was a revolution going on. The time period of Russia when the Soviet Union was the government. Okay, so England. Just think England, and you've got it, right? That should be pretty straightforward. The rest of these are pretty easy as well. Which characteristic of the Industrial Revolution contributed to the health concern highlighted here? Meaning, what happened during the Industrial Revolution that made everything so disgusting? What's our best answer? Yeah, urban population growth, right? Because what happens is, due to a lot of reasons that we'll get into a little bit later, people start leaving the farms, right? Maybe you guys remember, I'll talk about them now. You guys remember the agricultural revolution, right? The new machines to replace the need for farm workers. Well, when you don't have a job on the farm anymore, you're gonna start moving into the cities. So the cities grew rapidly and they didn't build enough sewers to to get rid of all the waste. So a lot of the waste ended up in the water supply, right? So since the population was growing so fast, the sewage system couldn't keep up and the water got disgusting. So what have we done to address the issue of the water killing people with cholera? What do? Try to improve the water, right? Because eventually we're gonna have to drink some water eventually, right? So we have to do improvements in water treatment. If you guys remember going way back earlier in the year, I showed you a video about this Jon Snow guy who went around interviewing people to try to figure out where the water was polluted. And then what they did was they passed a law that raised money to build a really advanced sewer system under the city of London to try to get the sewage out of the water. Good. How were those? Pretty easy, hopefully? Good. Good old partition of Africa. Imperialism in Africa to 1914. This is when World War I started. Can somebody remind me what imperialism means? Taking over another country, right? One country takes over another to seek out resources and new markets for goods. So I see a lot of European countries carving this place up. Can you guys associate the name of the meeting that took place that did this? Berlin Conference, very good. Can you guys remind me why, this was great for Europeans, obviously, but why this might have had a bad impact on Africans? Like, take a look at Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. Anglo is another way of saying England, right? So all this territory is now basically one place under British control. How might that be problematic? Okay, right, you're not taking into account the natural boundaries of the African people, right? Now a lot of different types of African people are going to be living under one rule. Why might that be problematic? What could happen? A lot of diverse peoples who maybe have a lot of differences now have to live in one country. What might happen? Conflict, right? What do we call the type of war? Civil war might happen, right? And that's what's been going on since this time period in a lot of these places, not all of them, but in a lot of places in Africa, where countries were formed or boundaries were formed that disregarded the natural cultural boundaries. Now people are being forced to work together and maybe they don't like each other so much and then we have conflict, right? When we were talking about like Sudan, no, here it is, right? You can see how big Sudan once was, a lot of diverse people here. didn't get along has continued to lead to civil war in these parts of the world. So now that we know that, this should be easy. What was the result of the political situation shown here? So the map happens. What happens after the map is created? 4. The boundaries that were established led to the division of traditional cultures and commerce, right? Cultures were divided up, split apart. Maybe some were, forced to live together that they didn't like each other. And that's what caused the Civil War to happen. Most local rulers had power equal to that of European leaders. No, certainly not, right? Africans are being exploited. They don't have any power, right? All they do is they exist to serve the interests of the Europeans. So I wouldn't say they had any power. The economic prosperity of the African nationalist leaders increased their power. Well, I don't think Africans are having economic prosperity during this time period, right? What does it mean if something's prosperous? Yeah, gaining things, right? You're rich, you're not poor, right? So I wouldn't say that any Africans had economic prosperity during this time period. So we cross off that one. African leaders willingly adopted European government? No, right? Who does that? Who says, I want you to come to my country and rule me? No one ever says that, right? So 4 is our best answer. This one's easy because it could be answered based on your knowledge or based on the map. Which African country successfully resisted the Europeans? Ethiopia. Even if you didn't know that, you could figure it out. Because if you look at this map key, the only place there are 2 places on this map that don't have any of these patterns, Liberia and Ethiopia. And since Liberia is not an answer choice, we pick Ethiopia. Very good. There was that guy, that leader, Menelik II, who started making deals with some Europeans to get weapons, and he used modern weapons to try to keep himself independent from the invading Italians. Cool. Let's keep going. This one's easy. It says attack. It says 1918. What was happening in the world where people were attacking each other in 1918? World War I. So obviously there's your answer, but we have more clues than that. Right, so for number 10, yes, our answer is World War I. But it also mentions tanks. It also mentions trenches and going over the top. Meaning I'm going to jump over my trench, charge across no man's land, risk my life, and try to attack the guys in the other trench. So since I see tanks and trenches and 1918, I pick World War I. Just for the sake of review, can you guys tell me any of the causes for World War I? Maybe you guys did this acronym in class. Each one of these letters in MANIA represents a cause. Can we label these? Militarism, very nice. Alliances, very good. Nationalism. Imperialism, right? Because people were competing for countries to help with industrialization. Here's the easy one. Who got shot? The Archduke, right? Assassination, right, of the Archduke is the last A here. Do you guys remember who killed, or what, a guy from which country killed the Archduke?
Serbia.
Yeah, a Serbian nationalist killed the Archduke. He was the prince of what place, do you remember? Austria-Hungary, yes. Serbian nationalist, you could also call him a terrorist, killed Archduke of Austria, Austria-Hungary Empire. Okay, basically, Austria-Hungary was a growing empire, and it took over a place called Bosnia, and the people in Bosnia had more in common with the people of Serbia. So the people of Serbia are like, wait, I don't want the people that I'm friendly with to be under Austrian rule. I'm going to send a clear message to Austria that it's unacceptable. Do you guys remember the group of people who lived in Serbia and Bosnia, what we called them? Like their culture, their cultural group, their ethnic group? Slavic, right? Slavic people lived in Serbia. Slavic people lived in Bosnia. So when the Austrians took over Bosnia, the Serbians are like, no, I don't like that so much. So then they assassinated the Prince of Austria to try to get Austria out of Serbian territory. And this is all in the Balkan Peninsula. Sometimes they're called the Balkan Peninsula, like the powder keg of Europe, because it's going to blow up at any point because of all the tension in that part of the world. That is an A, believe it or not. So which claim about modern warfare is best supported by the poem, right? So if you read the poem, it's just talking about all the horror that was going on. Smoke everywhere. You got tanks creeping around. You got barbed wire. You got people leaving trenches. People living in fear, wearing masks, probably gas masks. Always ask this one, right? This is very common. Technology made combat more deadly, right? I can't determine from the poem whether or not soldiers were as brave as the past. And two, like, you know, if you're charging across a trench, like a machine gun is shooting at you, that's pretty brave stuff right there, right? It's pretty nuts. So I don't think I can say that they're not as brave. And I see nothing, if you read the poem fully, you would see that there's nothing here about religion. Scientific research did not supply battle-ready innovations. Absolutely cannot choose that one. All right, scientific research is what leads to new technology, right? So they supplied the research and development of tanks, the research and development of machine guns and gas masks and gas attacks. So what can we conclude? Technology makes the war more deadly. And it would do the same thing again in World War II. What's the technology of World War II that made combat more deadly? More airplanes. And what else? Nuclear weapons. Good. Let's keep going. Bombay Sunday. Bombay is a place in India, if you didn't know that. Okay, 1930 is the year, but it comes from the Manchester Guardian. Manchester is in England. So we've got an English newspaper writing about something happening in India. Makes sense. Who was in control of India before independence? Who controlled them? British. The British, exactly. So we're going to write about that. We're going to hear about that. The great test has come for Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian nationalist leader, in his efforts to obtain complete independence of India from British rule. So here's that phrase again, nationalist leader, right? Gandhi wanted all Indian people to unite together to fight the British, which was really hard for Gandhi, because what are the two groups in India that historically maybe don't like each other so much? Two religious groups, you guys remember? Hindus and Muslims, right? Hindus and Muslims have a hard time getting along. Gandhi's like, you got to get past that, because if we're fighting with each other, there's no way we could beat the British, right? So that's why we call him a nationalist. He had pride in being Indian. He didn't want to be European. He wore Indian clothing. He made his own clothes, okay? And he wanted to unite Hindus and Muslims, which was difficult for him. Wading into the sea this morning at Dandi, the lonely village on the Arabian seashore, Gandhi and his followers broke the salt monopoly laws, and so inaugurated, meaning started, the campaign of mass civil disobedience. There's that phrase again. What is civil disobedience? Yeah, you're breaking the laws, right? You're protesting, even if it's illegal. You're breaking laws, right? It's a form of peaceful protest, nonviolent protest. There was no interference by the authorities, although a detachment of 150 police officers had been drafted into Dandi, and a further force of 400 police was at Jalapur. So they didn't interfere with whatever Gandhi is about to do with the salt situation. Predict, what does Gandhi do with salt? Salt march, right? He's like, I'm not buying British salt. It's ridiculous. I'm going to walk to the water, grab some salt water and melt and just evaporate it and have my own salt, right? Thinking if they stop buying British salt, the British economy suffers and the British would leave, right? Because the only reason why countries are there in the first place is to make money. The actual breaking of the salt monopoly law was witnessed by a large crowd who gathered at the seashore, surrounded by 100 volunteers, including those who had made the 200-mile march. Gandhi waded into the sea and bathed. Pots were then filled with seawater and boiled or left in the sunshine, and the salt residue sprinkled on the ground. Gandhi was hailed by this person, Mrs. Sarojini Naidu, the Indian poetess, as the lawbreaker. So they called Gandhi the lawbreaker. And if she's hailing him, meaning celebrating him, like, oh, Gandhi, like, look at you standing up to the British, you're the man. So the actions taken by Gandhi are examples of what? Yeah. As long as you guys know that civil disobedience is peaceful protest or nonviolent protest, that should be really easy. All right? Which statement best summarizes the effects actions like those expressed in this excerpt had on India? So what are the actions? The actions is Gandhi doing peaceful protest. What is the effect of Gandhi's peaceful protest that we learned about in history? Good, guys. British control of India gradually weakened and ended. Okay, this happened in 1930. Then World War II happens, and the British are really now thinking, okay, we don't have enough power to hold on to them anymore, and they don't want us here. So by 1947, India becomes independent with a catch. What did they do in India? They split it up. Very good. They partitioned India, meaning split it up, into India. And which religious group is going to be in India? This is for Hindus, and Pakistan for Muslims. And this created a refugee crisis as well. If I was a Hindu person living in what would become Pakistan, I'm now going to be kind of kicked out of my home. And I might feel some resentment towards the Muslims for that, right? So that causes conflict between the two groups as they were migrating to their new country. All right, that's just some extra backstory for you. Oh, our good old friend Palestine. Okay, Palestine is this whole region, and this is an important place in the world, especially this. Why? It's a religious place, right? Jerusalem is important. We don't need to go into why at the moment, but if you are Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, meaning you practice Islam, if you're a Muslim, then this is an important city for you. Okay? And lots of groups in history have been wanting to control all this. You guys remember in 9th grade hearing about the Crusades? Yeah. What were they fighting over? The Holy Land. This is the Holy Land. Okay? So conflict in this part of the world has been going on for, almost 1,000 years now. Not quite, but close to 1,000 years. Over time, over many, many years, more and more Jewish people start moving here. Because before 600, this had been the home of a lot of Jewish people. You might have heard of like the ancient kingdom of Israel with the capital of Jerusalem. That's like going back to like BC times. During the Roman Empire, this was a place where a lot of Jewish people lived. Okay, so Jews had been there before 600 AD, and increasingly they were saying, we should move back there because that's when our society was the strongest, when all Jewish people were united into one country. But when they were migrating here, that caused conflict with the Muslims who were already living there, right? So it's like a conflict over who was there most recently versus who was there first, I guess you could say, right? Tension between Jews and Muslims over control of Palestine. Okay, so for a while, between 1920 and 1948, this was a British mandate, meaning it used to be part of the Ottoman Empire. Now the British are in charge. And the British made a mistake. They promised that one day Muslims would have their own country here. But they made that same exact promise to Jewish people. Bad move, right? Because now those promises are in conflict. So what would you do if you promised this land to two different groups? What do you think they tried to do?
Civil wars.
It would lead to civil war, right? Because what they tried to do was split it up. All right, we made a promise to both groups. Let's just give both groups some of the land. So that's what they came up with, a partition plan in 1947. The dark gray would be the country for Muslims, okay? Arabic people practice Islam, therefore they're Muslims. And then the Jewish state of Israel would be the slanty line area. Neither side was happy with this. Jews wanted more, and the Muslims were like, wait a second, the United Nations is telling me that I have to give up my land to somebody else? Like, I don't understand how that's fair. So they're losing land in all this. So neither side is happy, right? And a lot of these other countries around it are thinking, this is messed up. Israel should not have the right to exist here in the first place. So like right after Israel is created, all these countries start going to war against Israel. Important thing to keep in mind is every time these neighboring countries went to war against Israel, Israel wins. Why? Who has always supported Israel? Because they're a democracy. The US, right? We've always supported Israel with modern weapons, okay? So if you've got modern technology, even if you're a small country, if you make all your citizens be in the military, which they do for their first couple of years after high school, and they have modern weapons, they could win those wars. So now that we know some of the backstory, there's more to it, but that's a good basic crash course for the last couple of minutes here. What would be the best use for this pair of maps? Meaning, what can I learn based on these maps, right? So if I look here, it says Jewish settlements. I'm seeing Jewish people in these dark gray areas. And then I see that we've got this partition plan in 1947? What's the best answer? This is, I think, a very hard question. Yeah, why is it 3? Right? It's showing Jewish people living in certain areas on the left. And then on the right, we see how they did the partition, right? So if you compare, this is a place on the map where Jewish people lived. And therefore, since Jewish people lived there, they turned that same region into part of a Jewish country of Israel. Same thing right here, right? Jewish people live here, Jewish people live here. So wherever Jewish people live, we're going to call that Israel. So that is our best answer. This helps us understand why they partitioned the land, because there are 2 groups here, so they try to give each side their own country. Notice though, right, it's a little bit unfair. Certainly the Jewish state is going to be larger, and it doesn't seem like there are any Jewish settlements here, but they still gave that land to Jewish people, right? That's why it was seen a little bit as unfair as well. Ooh, tough one. Which situation was a contributing factor in the decision to partition the land? Meaning cause. Contributing factor means cause. So why did they decide another reason for partitioning the land? Why is it 1? The date helps, right? The Holocaust is World War II. This happens right after World War II. Certainly, good call. Yeah, 6 million Jewish people died in the Holocaust. The world felt bad for Jewish people, right? And Jewish people were migrating back to what they believed to be their ancient homeland. So people were like, you know what? Why don't we just give the Jewish people that live here their own country? If they have their own country, no one would bully them anymore, and there would no longer be a Holocaust, right? So that sympathy for Jewish people after the Holocaust is what led them to give Jewish people their country of Israel. Very good. A speech given by Nehru at the Bandung Conference in 1955. Oh my goodness, right? Let's take a look really quickly. If all the world were to be divided up between these 2 big blocks, what would be the result? The inevitable result would be war. Okay, when you see block like this, B-L-O-C-S, that is not a typo. This is a group of countries. So let's think about this for a second. Groups of countries, 1955, and there are 2 big ones. What were the 2 big groups of countries that existed in the world in 1955? Good, excellent. NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Those are your 2 groups, right? This is the group that the US was in. That was the group that the Soviet Union was in. So he's saying this is going to lead eventually to World War III, is what he's claiming. Therefore, every step that takes place in reducing that area in the world, which may be called the unaligned area, is a dangerous step and leads to war. It reduces that objective, that balance, that outlook, which other countries without military might can perhaps exercise. Okay? So basically, what he's saying is it's dangerous that a lot of countries in the world are deciding to pick a side, right? He doesn't want every single country joining one of these things, right? Because he's saying if all the countries in the world pick a side, and if a war happens, the whole planet is going to blow up. So it's really important that some countries don't pick a side. What do we call it when a country doesn't pick a side in a conflict? Neutral, right? What he's arguing, and this very confusing source here, is that countries should be neutral. Because if the countries decide to be neutral, they won't be drawn into a war, and then the planet has some hope, if you will. So when he says unaligned, this is referring to something called the non-aligned movement. Unaligned, non-aligned means the same thing. He's encouraging a lot of countries to not pick one of these sides. So what led this Nehru guy to promote his policy of being unaligned? Yes, you're right. You got it. Okay? Expansion of the Cold War blocks, right? Blocks are these things. And they get bigger. They're still getting bigger, right? We just learned a couple of weeks ago about a new country that joined NATO, Finland, right? So this is still going on. It's an enduring issue, right? So if all the world gets caught up in alliances, that's going to, lead to disaster. So since they're getting bigger, that's what's making him nervous and saying these things. Very good. Which countries would be most likely to agree with this Nehru guy? Meaning, which countries are going to say, you know what? It's a good idea. Let's not get caught up in one of these two sides. What do you think? This is really hard. 3 is the answer. How come you picked 3? Really good. All the rest of them are already in alliances, right? Satellite countries are in which one of these? Warsaw Pact, good stuff. Communist nations in Asia are already in, probably the Warsaw Pact. Democracies in Western Europe are in NATO. But the newly independent ones are brand new countries. They haven't picked a side yet, right? And newly independent countries don't have strong militaries, right? If I don't have a strong military, I don't want to be in one of these things, right? Because that means I'm going to have to, if I'm committed to an alliance, but I don't have a strong military, that means my country is going to suffer a lot, right? We're going to get beat pretty badly in a war. So I don't want to be in an alliance if my country is brand new and kind of weak. Does that make sense? Cool. We got to know this guy's face. Mao Zedong. All right? Mao's cult of personality. Okay, cult of personality is a phrase that basically means the leader tries to do whatever he can to make himself look like larger than life, like a god. Like there's statues of a leader everywhere. He's on these propaganda posters all over the country, okay? So that's what's shown in this picture here is Mao trying to cultivate the sense that the dude is like larger than life, right? In an attempt to try to make the people follow his policies. Do you guys remember that word propaganda? What does propaganda mean? Yeah, it's when the government puts out information to make itself look really good, right? So Mao Zedong's trying to make himself look like a godlike figure. This is propaganda. Usually countries that are totalitarian, right, where the government runs every aspect of your life, they use a lot of propaganda, and they also try to restrict your access to certain information. What's that word for that we use? Where they don't let you hear all the stuff in the country. Censorship. Okay, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, and it has nothing to do with Mao. It's the guy who was in charge after Mao, that Deng Xiaoping guy. Do you remember what event happened in China in the 80s where the government was like, we don't really want people to know the bad things that we did, so we're going to censor that information? There was a protest where the students were looking for democracy. Do you remember where they got shot, right? Tiananmen Square massacre. Okay, this is just an example of Chinese censorship. Okay, if you were to go on the internet in China and type in Tiananmen Square massacre, you're not going to get the whole story. Okay, because the government does not want you hearing about some of the bad things, because if you don't hear about the bad things, maybe you won't challenge the power of that government. So all this stuff kind of goes along with what we see here. Mao's cult of personality also went beyond the badges and the little red book. Okay, this is like basically his collection of ideas that kids were forced to learn about in school. There were propaganda posters inside homes, classrooms, meeting halls, office buildings, and factories. The line beneath Mao's image says, wishing Chairman Mao a long life. That's what's captioned here in Chinese. So this is a really hard question here. Which political leader other than Mao would do something like this? So you have to ask yourself, which one of these leaders behaved just like Mao? Emperor Meiji, okay?
I meant 3.
You meant 3. Good man. That's all right. Yeah, Emperor Meiji is the Japanese leader during the Meiji Restoration. He did a lot of modernization and westernization. I wouldn't say that Meiji had totalitarian rule. To some extent, even the Japanese people at that time had some degree of democracy. So if they have some degree of democracy, I'm not going to associate that with this type of propaganda. Remind me what Nelson Mandela did? Okay, right? Protest movements, civil disobedience to end apartheid. How about this guy? It's been a while since we've talked about him. Otto von Bismarck. Do we remember him? I think we start with maybe where he might be from, with a name like Otto. Ideas? Next to France. Rhymes with Hermione.
Germany.
Germany. Okay, he's a German nationalist leader who wanted to unite all the German people using what policy? Blood and iron. Good memory, Rob. All right, so he's not a totalitarian leader associated with propaganda. Joseph Stalin is, though. Okay, Joseph Stalin is let's list some totalitarian leaders to know. Totalitarian leaders, right? These are people who have control over every aspect of your life. Mao Zedong is one. Can you think of another person other than Stalin who had full control over every aspect of people's lives? Lenin, yes. Hitler. Fidel Castro, I'll take it. How about a North Korean guy? Kim Jong-un. Good. The design and use of this poster suggests its purpose was too. Basically what the question is asking is, what's the point of propaganda posters? Because that's what this is, a propaganda poster. Yeah, get people to buy into the power of the government, right? Build support for China's leader among the people, right? Make him look like a godlike figure. Absolutely. Which historical development is most closely associated with this poster? This is hard. It's basically asking, during what time period of Chinese history did Mao do stuff like this to get people on his side? This is super hard. It's the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution, guys, is similar to the French Reign of Terror. Do we remember anything about the Reign of Terror? People got their heads chopped off. Do we remember why? Yes, if you challenged the new government, if you still supported the king, they put you on a guillotine and lopped your head off. Okay? It wasn't quite that violent with this. I'm not insinuating that it was, but what they did was they really had no tolerance for people who were questioning Mao. So they tried to repress people who challenged him, and they tried to pump people up with propaganda to make them support Mao. Okay, one of the things he did was he, basically you guys, your age group, right, would indoctrinate kids into believing that this guy was awesome, and then they would go out into the world, into Chinese society and, rat people out for being anti-Mao, and then those people would get arrested, right? Not so great, I suppose, right? They often arrested a lot of teachers. It's also similar to Stalin's rule. He had no tolerance for opposition either. Do you guys remember a group of people that challenged Stalin that were in Ukraine, what they were called? Those farmers that didn't like Russia. They were being forced to be collective farmers, definitely, and they didn't want anything to do with it. Right, so then Stalin was like,
weren't they like kulaks?
Kulaks, good man, yeah. Kulaks challenged the authority of Stalin by resisting collective farms, right? They burned the fields, they killed all the animals. And Stalin's like, okay, you want to do that? I'm not going to let you eat ever, right? So all they did was bring the government troops into Kulak lands and take all their crops. And he basically tried to starve them all to death. This was called the Ukrainian Holodomor, or Ukrainian forced famine. Right, so the point is, this is the Cultural Revolution in Chinese history. It's when they eliminated opposition to Mao, but also tried to get people to really have a lot of firm beliefs in this guy, right? Because what happens under Mao is he had some policies that really weren't so successful, so he's kind of afraid that, people might start to challenge him, so he tries to go after them during the Cultural Revolution. Does that make any kind of sense, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay, when you see this, special economic zones, this is something that corresponds with the guy who took over after Mao. Who's the guy that was next and brought in capitalism into special economic zones? It was Deng, yes. Deng Xiaoping. I doubt you'll be asked anything about the current president of China. It's a little bit too current. Xi Jinping is the guy. Most likely you got to know about two Chinese leaders, Mao and Deng. Mao is the communist. Deng Xiaoping brought in some capitalism to China, right? That's what special economic zones means. It means you can open up a business in certain parts of China and earn a profit. Efforts to confront opium, that happened like 100 years before Mao, right? That's the middle of the 1800s. This is the middle of the 1900s. So that doesn't make any sense. Nationalist rebellions against Qing rule. This is, again, the late 1800s. Way before, this is an L, believe it or not, way before Mao. Okay, what happens is, a lot of people in China, the Qing was the last government in China before communism. Maybe you could remind me the name of one of those Chinese rebellions. Bam, 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 bam. Yeah, Rocky, right? The Boxer Rebellion. Okay, so when you see rebellions against the Qing, that's the Boxer Rebellion. There was another one too, I doubt they'll ever ask you about it, the Taiping Rebellion. Don't be overwhelmed if you don't remember that. I'm just giving it to you just in case. All right, there were two rebellions in China against the government. The Boxer Rebellion was against the government, but also against foreign influence. But together, they definitely have that in common: anti-Qing dynasty. All right, Kemal Ataturk. Dude is on like every single Regents. When you see Kemal Ataturk, firstly, what country? Turkey, right? You're right? That's the policies, right? So Kemal Ataturk brought modernization and westernization to Turkey. What does the word secular mean? So Turkey had a lot of Islamic influence for a long time, and this guy wanted to have like separation of church and state. This means non-religious. He wanted to build a country in which the government was not run by religious leaders anymore. It used to be, okay, because the Ottoman Empire had the Turkish people living inside of it, but the Ottoman Empire collapses after World War I, and Turkey is like the leftovers of the Ottoman Empire. And they're trying to do whatever they can to not get taken over by the British and the French. So really quickly, they try to be more like Western Europe. Industrialization, they want to have separation of church and state, they want women and men to be able to hang out together, they want to use the same alphabet that we use and not the Arabic writing system, which is a lot harder to learn. Okay, so this whole source is about modernization and westernization. The second one here is talking about how they banned a certain type of hat called the fez, which was seen as really old school. And a lot of people were kind of ticked off about that. Some people were on board with the fashion changes. The conservative population was not. Fez is like almost like a big round top hat with like a string on the side of it. Google it, you'll see what I mean. All right, so when you see questions like this or sources like this, and we're talking about how some people were down with change and some were not, it's talking about an enduring issue, right? The tension between the modern and traditional is being reflected here. That's it, yes. You see the similar trends in Iran, tension between modern and traditional, right? For a while, Iran had a modernization kind of government in, right? They had that Shah guy in power. And then in 1979, hardcore Muslims took it back over and made women cover their faces again. Okay, it's another part of the world that has some tension between modern and traditional. So these should be easy though. Yes, they are. The women of Iran are very mad about that. What did he do? Yes, modernize Turkey in the image of European nations. That just means you're going to copy. So what kids tend to do with this is they pick. Which one do they tend to pick? What's that? Yeah, right, because the legal system sounds modern, but not. They don't want to base their system on religion, right? Because they want to be secular, they want to be non-religious. Like the American law system is not based on religion, right? It's just written by secular individuals. So yes, when you see Turkey and Ataturk, you think modernization. But this second question refers to that tension I was talking about. The phrase is deeply conservative population, right? Conservative means you don't want change. Lengthy sentences of imprisonment for those people who protested, and a few hangings suggests what about these policies? 2, tensions existed between reformers and traditionalists, right? Not everyone was willing to go along with the laws. These guys would rather be thrown in jail than take their hats off, right? They're deeply committed to their fashion. Soviet involvement in Afghanistan. What other country had involvement in Afghanistan that we learned about this year? The US. Okay, 10 years of Soviet involvement, 20 years of American involvement. Let's talk about Afghanistan stuff. I know we've done this before, but not all of you guys were here when I talked about Afghanistan. Tell me what we know about Afghanistan. Taliban is in charge. Yes. Strict Islamic state. Just like with perhaps Iran, the country follows very strict conservative Islamic principles in their government, meaning patriarchy, right? Women aren't going out. If they are, they're covered head to toe. Women don't receive an education. So maybe very little rights for women, meaning not a lot. What else do we know about Afghanistan? Rich country or poor country? Yeah. Okay, a lot of poverty. You might call it, I don't know, a third world nation or developing nation. They kind of mean the same thing. Third world nation just means a country that has a lot of poverty. Like the US would be like first world because we have a strong economy. It's the number 1 in the world, right? The countries that are like doing a lot better, I would call like maybe India, second world country, but third world countries have a lot of poverty. So can you remind me why America went to Afghanistan 21 years ago? 9/11. So US invaded after 9/11. Okay, so the Al-Qaeda was the terrorist organization that did 9/11. they were doing their training. Bin Laden was from, I apologize, he was not from Afghanistan, but the Taliban let Bin Laden train terrorists inside of Afghanistan. Okay, but before the US was there, why was the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan? Do we remember? What's always the goal of the Soviet Union? Spread communism, right? So USSR, which is the Soviet Union, invaded to spread communism, okay? And this is like a reason why the US got involved even early on, right? The US was training opposition groups to the Soviet Union to try to fight the communists. Okay, some of those fighters ended up becoming the Taliban. But anyway, I don't want to get too off topic. So this source here is like talking about the costs of Soviet involvement, meaning like the financial cost of being there for so long. Soviet leaders continued to express frustration over the protracted, meaning drawn out, war in Afghanistan. This source is being written in the late 1980s. This was evident at the Party Congress in February 1986, when General Secretary Gorbachev referred to the war as a bleeding wound, meaning we can't stop the bleeding, it's not going so well. Soviet involvement in Afghanistan has led to periodic censure within the within the United Nations, become a stumbling block to improved Sino-Soviet relations and complicated Soviet policy toward nations in the non-aligned movement. Okay, basically what that means is a lot of countries are cutting off their ties to the Soviet Union because of this. At home, pockets of social unrest related to Afghanistan, the diversion of energies from pressing economic problems, and dissatisfaction in the political hierarchy over the failure to end the war also probably worry the leadership. So basically saying, long story short, this war in Afghanistan is causing a lot of problems, okay? Because what they really need to be doing is fixing their economy, but all their attention is on spreading communism in Afghanistan. The war has not been a substantial drain on the Soviet economy so far, although the costs of the war have been rising faster than total defense spending. So they're spending more and more as the years go on. We estimate that from their initial invasion in 1979 through 1986, the Soviets have spent about 15 billion rubles, think of that as like Russian dollars, on the conduct of the war. Of this total, about 3 billion would have been spent over the 7-year period, even if the USSR had not occupied Afghanistan. Again, a confusing source, but what they're basically saying is the war in Afghanistan is costing them more and more money. So the situation described is going to be part of which trend here? It is 3. Growing regional conflicts during the Cold War. How is it a conflict during the Cold War? One country is invading another country, right? Isn't that conflict? Yeah. Absolutely. This source says nothing about Africa. It's nothing about Southeast Asia. Okay, Southeast Asia is where like Vietnam is. Okay, so Afghanistan is like Central Asia, not Southeast Asia. So we cross off both of those. And Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, Afghanistan is not one of those countries. Afghanistan is not really known for being an oil country like Iran and Iraq are. So we're going to cross that one out. But conflict is here in the source. Okay, it is asking about the passage. This one's tough. What was caused by the Soviet war in Afghanistan? Yeah, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay? Being there for 10 years led to a lot of economic problems for the Soviet Union. It helped bring about their downfall. Okay? The placement of nukes was not caused by the invasion of Afghanistan. Okay? The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan did not cause the building of the Berlin Wall, nor did it cause Soviet occupation of Hungary. That happened way, way earlier on. Right? Hungary is one of those satellite nations. All right. Let's move on to 25 and 26.
I think number 24.
We didn't do 24? My bad. There you go, number 4. Okay, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan is a cause for Soviet decline, for sure. All right, so, these questions are hard because they're talking about something that's a modern issue. If your teacher got to it, they probably talked about it really quickly because it's something that's kind of current. Okay, NAFTA. Let's take some NAFTA notes. Do you guys remember what this stands for? Okay, this is the North American Free Trade Agreement. Okay, this is basically the North American version of the European Union. Do you guys remember learning about the European Union at all? Hopefully a little bit. Okay, so what they agree, okay, North American, this is the US, Canada, and Mexico. And what these countries agree to do is allow free trade between them without tariffs. Can you guys remind me what a tariff is? It is a charge. What kind of charge? Exactly, right? This is a tax on imports. Okay, typically what countries like to do before the modern times is they would put tariffs on products from foreign countries to encourage you to buy stuff made in your own country, right? Think about this scenario. Let's say you're car shopping and you're comparing, I don't know, a Ford to a Volkswagen. Volkswagen's from what country? Do we know? It's German, okay? Ford is American, Volkswagen is German. Let's say that both cars are equal in terms of quality. But since it's foreign and the US government maybe wants you to buy Fords, it puts a tariff on the Volkswagen, and now the Volkswagen costs $10,000 more when you go to buy it. If the quality is the same, which would you choose? Probably the Ford.
I'd probably choose the cheaper one.
What's that? Choose the cheap one, right? That makes sense if the quality is the same, right? So that sounds good, right? Because now Ford knows it can sell a lot of cars to Americans, but is Volkswagen making any sales anymore?
No.
No. So what's going to happen to the Volkswagen company?
They're going to come bankrupt.
They're going to go out of business, right? And then maybe those people lose their jobs, and then maybe they stop buying stuff from America, right? Maybe it causes like a chain reaction, right? Maybe they also are hurt, and then when they're hurting over in Germany, they don't buy American-made stuff, right? Maybe they don't buy iPhones anymore because they lost their jobs. Okay, so what we've decided is that tariffs are not great. We don't really do this stuff anymore because it kind of slows down trade, right? Maybe the Germans hate us for doing it, right? Maybe that causes an enemy, right? Because Germans know that Americans won't buy their stuff anymore. So generally what the world has been doing, either Canada, US, and Mexico, or the European Union countries, is we stop doing tariffs. And that allows the countries to trade with each other, and the goods tend to have lower prices. You kind of following me so far? A little bit, hopefully? Right? When tariffs aren't there, there's no taxation, products are cheaper, and it's good for us too, because there's more competition, right? You want there to be more than just Ford cars available, right? Because if it's only Ford, that's a monopoly, right? Monopolies, we don't want that. We want competition, okay? So this source is referring to some of these things down here. Let's take a look. China is such a powerhouse of low-cost manufacturing that even though the NAFTA Accord has given Mexico a leg up with the US, meaning NAFTA has led to more trade between Mexico and the US, and even though Mexico was right next door to us, meaning Mexico is right on our border, China in 2003 replaced Mexico as the #2 exporter to the US. What does it mean if China is exporting to the US? Yeah, you're selling it and shipping, right? So what it's saying here is that China is selling stuff to the US. Right? It's the #2 exporting country to the US. Canada remains #1. This source is from a long time ago now. I think this is now out of date. I think China is now #1.
Almost 2 decades.
Yeah, almost 2 decades. Though Mexico still has a strong position in big ticket exports that are costly to ship, such as cars, auto parts, and refrigerators, China is coming on strong and has already displaced Mexico in areas such as computer parts, electrical components, toys, textiles, sporting goods, and tennis shoes. So basically, if you want to buy a car, yeah, you can get that from Mexico because it costs a lot of money to ship a car from China to the US. But things that are very lightweight, such as all these things, China is now the #1 country to get those from. But what's even worse for Mexico is that China is displacing some Mexican companies in Mexico.
What does that mean?
So that means if you went to a store in Mexico, it used to have stuff made in Mexico in it. But now when you go to a store in Mexico, the stores in Mexico are selling Chinese-made stuff, right? So maybe that hurts the Mexican economy a little bit. And now toys are now showing up on store shelves everywhere from China.
Made in China.
Made in China, right. No wonder a Mexican journalist told me about the day he interviewed a Chinese central bank official who told him something about China's relationship with America that really rattled him. So a Chinese person saying something about America. First, we were afraid of the wolf, and I think he's referring to America as this wolf, like this powerful thing. Then we wanted to dance with the wolf, right? Maybe dance represents like relationship. And now we want to be the wolf, meaning now China now wants to be the powerhouse country. According to this person, why is it surprising that Mexico is being replaced by China as the number 2 exporter to the US? Says it in the source. Like, it's weird. Like, why don't we just get our stuff from Mexico? Why are we buying from China now? Why is it weird that we stop buying from Mexico? Yeah, Mexico's right on our border, right? Wouldn't it make more sense to just buy everything from Mexico? You would think so. But this shows, again, just how inexpensive the labor is in China, right? That's why so much stuff is manufactured there. Okay, even the Mexican wages are higher, so companies don't manufacture a lot of stuff in Mexico. They still want to make their stuff in China, except for like stuff like cars, I guess, you know? In the quotation, first we're afraid of the wolf, then we want to dance with the wolf, and now we want to be the wolf. What does the wolf symbolize? Rob?
One.
Yeah, an economic powerhouse, right? America was the economic powerhouse, and China now wants to be the economic powerhouse. Yeah, these were really, really tough, these questions. Okay, one of the most important effects on the environment is indirect, and therefore less obvious. Industrial meat production is a key factor behind the deforestation of the Amazon. What is this word, deforestation? Cutting down the forests. What continent is the Amazon in? Yes, South America. What is significant about the area around the Amazon? Rainforest, right? So what they're saying here is that meat production is a reason for cutting down the trees. Why? Because cows need places to kind of hang out and graze on grasses. Cows cannot hang out in a rainforest. So they're cutting down trees to expand the land that cows can hang out on. Rainforests are being cleared to create fields to grow the feed needed for all those cows, especially corn and soy, which the cows eat instead of the grass they'd munch on if they were grazing in fields as they used to, right? So they're turning the fields into areas where they're growing cattle feed. In fact, most of the corn and soy grown today goes to feed cattle, pigs, and chickens, not people. And all that grain requires vast quantities of chemical fertilizer, which in turn takes vast quantities of oil, believe it or not. 1.2 gallons to create the fertilizer for every bushel. Finally, cutting down rainforests, which are full of carbon-absorbing trees, like you said, further worsens climate change by reducing the planet's ability to soak up carbon. So 27 is easy. Which issue is associated with the stuff in this passage? Climate change, yes. All right, so drought means what? Let's talk about that word. Yeah, no rainfall, okay? It's not, I'm sure that is a problem in certain parts of the world, but it's not being talked about here, okay? It is talking about the passage, right? Answer it based on the passage. What is this word migration? Moving, right? It doesn't say anything about people having to move, okay? How about the word famine? Hunger. Yeah, I think we can make the case though that since they're doing this to feed the cows that we're going to eat, that it's trying to prevent famine, right? So I think climate change is the answer because it's talking about growing carbon problems, right? Carbon creates global warming issues. Good. In which way, this is hard, in which way have countries joined together to address these problems? Some of you guys who have been hanging out with me for a while now probably know this one. Yes, signing international agreements. Fantastic. Okay, so the thing is, guys, with climate change, one country could decide, yeah, pollution is bad, we're going to stop pollution.
And then they'll just continue it again.
If the other countries still keep doing it, we're going to have problems. So all the countries have to agree to try to fix these things. Eat more vegan things, right? That certainly helps for sure. But we should have in the back of our minds the name of one of these agreements. Okay, this is the Kyoto Agreement.
Never got that.
Okay, this is the late 1990s in Japan. Countries decided we're going to help the environment.
Does the P go in front of it?
The P, protocol, right. Sometimes they call it a protocol. This is the Paris Climate Agreement. This is the more recent one, okay? Hopefully the Regents does not ask you about those specifically, but they have in the past, right? We saw that recently, that Kyoto was an answer choice in one of the last other Regents exams. This is nice and simple, nice and broad, but you never know.